Okay, so today we're going to go over how to make your own Dark Jedi lightsaber. This is a 3D printed prop. We'll go into details about what kind, and we'll talk about how to put this all together today here on. Okay, so I'm really excited. I'm a big Star Wars fan, a huge fan of the lore, the aesthetic of the films, the cartoons, the comics. And I've long wanted to make my own lightsaber. I have my own collection of lightsabers. Most of them are from the Disney parks, but I really wanted to build my own. This is a 3D printed one that I put together. It's got some really nice weight to it. It has a PVC pipe that runs through the whole thing for structure. These are 100% filled parts. And you can see I did some painting and weathering on it just to see if I like the general aesthetic of the piece. We're not going to build something that looks like this aesthetically. While the structure might be the same or very similar, we're going to go a different direction on it. I'm really fortunate. I happen to be an educator, and at the institution I work at, the faculty were really generous, and they printed a version for me on an SLS printer with nylon material. It's a dry powder that forms into this shape. It's really cool. There's really no layer lines. It's smooth. It actually has a really interesting texture to it. The way the structure of this piece works is you have the two main pieces that will come together. There will be a connection in the middle with a thumb screw that will allow me to take this apart and reassemble it as needed. There's a center core which runs through the whole piece. It gives it additional weight and rigidity, which is really important. And inside of this is going to go a baselit chassis for the lightsaber that I purchased off Etsy. I will put a link to where I got this in the description. We are going to customize this. We're going to weather it. And we're going to make this more of a Sith style or Dark Jedi style lightsaber. So let's jump over to the workbench and see what we can put together. Okay. So this build is actually really straightforward. Because I 3D modeled these pieces in Tinkercad, I don't have a lot of construction work that I have to do, not a lot of carving or any carving, particularly when we think about the assembly of the Bounty Hunter blaster. There'll be a thumb screw that will hold this together and should provide enough stability. I'm not too worried about this. This is meant to be on a display or cosplay at best. I'm not going to be swinging this around. I don't intend on attaching a blade to this and doing any dueling. It's merely for aesthetic or display purposes. At some point during this build, I am going to glue the core into this piece here. And the only piece that we'll actually have to detach or worry about detaching is here. For now, I don't really need this until the painting stage. So I'm going to set this aside and we'll come back to this later. Aesthetically speaking, this is fine. I made this. I should be happy with it. It does have variation in planes. It has directions of line that vary. So there is depth to this. There is visual texture. And of course, paint and color will certainly add to that. But I'm inspired by the Jedi Killer or the Kylo Ren saber. I know the crossguard is particularly controversial, but I really like the red wire that runs through it. I don't have the same style clamps, and I don't have anything that sort of emulates those that I could use. But I do have these pieces here, which I got off a circuit board that have a hole in them. I intend on attaching these pieces at different points on the lightsaber and making it appear as though the wire is coming out of that area. Now, I would particularly prefer for the red wire to extend across the entire saber at multiple points. The problem with that is I want to detach this. I don't intend on having enough slack to allow me to take this out, bend it, move it, and so forth, so that I could get the RGB core in and out. I may attach this in a way where part of it is frayed and broken so that it really does look like it went through a battle. Let's get building, and we're going to start attaching all these pieces and go from there. So for this piece here, I want it to have a mechanical connection. It's a perfect size to slot right into one of these grooves. So I'm just going to drill a hole and screw in this bolt and piece for an additional accent. Right now, what I'm hoping to do is just give this, again, more texture. Lightsabers, they come in many different formats. Some are really smooth and pristine and minimal. That's fine. I would like a little bit more out of mine, a little bit more mechanical qualities to it. So I'm trying to add in places where I think it would still be comfortable to hold and not get in the way, different lightsaber grips. What I like about super glue is when the time comes, it's sandable. Hot glue is not. At least I haven't been successful at doing that. So super glue offers that extra benefit. Okay, so I've added all the accents I want to. Again, I designed this on Tinkercad. It's got a lot of the texture there. I put on a little bit more. Before I go ahead and sort of give this a light sanding for priming, I want to add some Mod Podge texture to this. I don't know if I'm going to rust the effect in the end, but I do want it to still feel old. So I want there to be elements of build-up grime or maybe deteriorating paint texture that is on top of this. So I'm going to go ahead and use the same technique I used on the Star Wars blaster. We're going to use some Mod Podge. We're going to let it dry as we apply it. When it gets tacky, we stipple it to build it up more, and that's going to create this texture throughout the entire piece. Take your time with this. Building up texture is equally as important to building up paint. You want to pick and choose where you put it. You don't want to cover the whole thing or else that kind of distracts from the piece as a whole. But you want to emphasize certain areas, really take your time to build this up. It's okay to layer it. Again, if you feel like it's leveling itself, if you feel like it's not getting tacky fast enough, you can always blow dry it and then keep going. Okay, so I am done applying the Mod Podge. It's still a little wet in certain areas. You can tell because it's still white. It hasn't dried completely clear. But what's really nice about the Mod Podge is it just shows through the spray paint. Spray paint is thicker than an airbrush for sure, but you still can't hide textural differences with spray paint. And that's what I want. So I want to see these different pieces come through. If I have to go back later after I've painted the piece, then I will. It dries clear. It's something I can easily work with and continue to build that up as I go. Something to note, this feels pretty good in the hand. Yes, this thumb screw is a little bulky, but I like it aesthetically. But the rest of these pieces do feel good in the hand. The only thing is these black pieces are starting to cut into the hand a little bit. They're scraping. So I'm just going to very carefully sand these down around the edges. I don't want them to pop off the piece, so I do have to be careful. The trick with sandpaper, if you are pushing with sandpaper and using a lot of effort, then the sandpaper is not doing the job. It's probably not heavy grit enough. You shouldn't have to push that hard with sandpaper. It should be easy, light, change the grit if you need to. Okay, I'm pleased with that. It's a lot more comfortable to hand. Those black pieces from the circuit board aren't cutting into me as much. So now we're gonna paint this. We're actually going to do 2 layers before we even get to the black. I do want this to be a black lightsaber hilt, but first we're going to do a silver metallic primer, because that's what I have. And then on top of that, I'm going to add a copper coating, and then we'll seal that with a satin finish. The reason I'm doing the copper coating is I want the copper to be the primary accent piece for when I chip or scrape away at the edges. I don't want it to be an entirely silver metallic aluminum underneath finish. So let's go ahead and spray paint this, and we'll be back. Before spray painting this, I forgot to mention, I want to reassemble the piece a little bit. This is a very snug fit, and the moment I add spray paint to the interior piece, then we're going to have a problem with getting this installed. So what I'm going to do is make sure everything lines up. I actually have a hole drilled in the side so I can see exactly where this needs to go. We're going to glue this in because I do want this to be painted as well. I'll mask off the bottom so I don't have to worry about this having any paint to make sliding this in problematic at a later date. So I'm going to do that first, then I'll spray paint it, and then we'll come back. Okay, so this is now covered in several layers of spray paint, including a metallic aluminum primer, the copper finish or metallic finish, and then a layer or 2 of satin sealant. You can see in the light that the areas where I added Mod Podge texturally look different. That's what I wanted. But right now we are starting with the mustard stage. Mustard is a readily available material that allows us to chip away paint easily and expose color from underneath. In this case, I'm going to add mustard to a lot of the edges. I don't want too much copper to show through, but it is an accent color. And so I'm going to go through and add mustard to a lot of the edges. And that way, when we paint this black, we can wipe those edges away and copper accents and weathering will show through. You want to be strategic as you apply mustard or any masking medium. It should feel random, but it's difficult to be as random as a battle when you are trying just to paint something on. So you do your best, take your time, really think about the areas that might show more, might show less, why they would show. Is it an area that's really easy to being hit? You know, you got to think about all those things as you're creating this. Having a narrative in your mind, story behind your prop or your object, whatever it might be, is really helpful. It helps you as an artist, as someone who's creative, really think about these locations, think about what you're doing and why. Now that we have finished our mustard application, I'm going to spray paint this whole thing with a matte black paint and chip away some of the paint. We'll see if I need to add more of the Mod Podge, and we'll go from there. Okay, so this is painted. I apologize. I know it's a black lightsaber on top of a black cutting mat, but as before with my blaster, you can see just from handling it, some of the areas are already starting to chip. I didn't let the spray paint fully go into some of the creases. I wanted to leave that a little bit lighter with the bronze. That way I get some depth on the lightsaber without having to go back in and doing it. And I'm just going to start to wipe away at all the areas I think I added mustard to. Okay, so I'm very pleased with this. It's coming together quite nicely. I like the parts that chipped off. I would still like to see a little bit more copper accents throughout. I don't have a copper paintbrush. I don't have copper rub and buff. So what I'm going to do is take some of the spray paint and use some Q-tips. And this is going to allow me to apply copper. Nice. Whoa. It's going to allow me to apply copper accents to the piece without ruining one of my paintbrushes. While we were waiting for the super glue to fully cure, I've got a little bit of the copper left over in that bowl, and I'm gonna gently highlight some of these rectangular pieces along the hilt. I want them to stand out a little bit more than they do now. Worst case scenario, if I overdo it, I can always add black on top. There, yeah, you can see that's coming out really nicely. It's picking up some of the texture from the black paint, but it's still adding a little bit more of this copper. And I just wanted to add some of that across, just break up all this black. There's a lot of black and copper, and since I know some of my pieces have a more metallic steel or aluminum finish, I thought it would be nice to see some of those come through. But here you can see I left a little bit of black. There's even some copper accent on that, just to break this up. I may even use the paint pen that I used on the blaster and highlight some other areas just with a little bit of metallic silver. I think we're gonna call this done and install the chassis. All right, this is really exciting. It looks great. I'm very pleased with it. I like the red wire accent, similar to the Kylo Ren lightsaber hilt. As I mentioned before, I glued this together. Fortunately, the chassis can slide in through the top, and I'll still be able to screw it in, and we'll see if it works. Well, I'm really excited. I went back into this after doing the install. It didn't have enough character for me. So I added these wires in the front. I did a little bit more weathering, and I went through and I darkened the red wires with a wash, just so they recessed a little bit more into the hilt. But overall, I'm really pleased with this. This definitely feels like a Sith lightsaber hilt or a Dark Jedi lightsaber hilt. So let's go ahead and turn this on. This is a RGB base light hilt. I'm really pleased with it. Again, I got this off Etsy, and I'll post the link on the description of the video. Okay, let's go to the final review.